All right. Hello, everybody. Ron is out of town. You have to put up with me and my delay. Why it does this sometimes it doesn't. And I'll do things like mess with the camera, like I'm going to do in just a second, just to see if I can, maybe adjust it so that it doesn't do it so bad. And see for a second, maybe, but oh well. Good to see you. I'm Douglas Villegas, Mr. Constitution. And it's my pleasure to be here. Once again, Ron is out of town, so he has left me the keys to the car, the liquor cabinet, and the business. What could go wrong? It's good to see you. Glad you're here. I've got the chat room up in case anybody wants to chat. Already someone before the show started said, any chance you get Roy Brunson to join? There's been contact with Roy Brunson because of the Brunson brothers case. But we haven't been able to formalize anything. So I don't know. Good question, Tiger. We'll see if we can maybe get that resolved in the near future. Great to have you here. I am Mr. Constitution. We're going through the Constitution. It's a Constitution class online. For those of you who attend to my Constitution classes live in Southern California, welcome. If this is your first time, welcome. Normally, you got Ron and I bantering back and forth. Once again, Ron is out of town, but he gave me the keys to the whole thing, so that I can still hold the show because we had missed 2 weeks a few weeks ago. One time because of him, one time because of me. Our schedules, the fact is, sometimes we have schedules that interfere. So it's good to be here. Good to have you. We have been working our way through Article 1. So for those of you who have a pocket Constitution or have the Constitution up online, we're not going to have the aid of an image being shared screen. I'm not doing all of that. Too much for one person to do as he's talking. So it's just going to be me talking. But if you have your Constitution or pocket Constitution, online Constitution, Article 1, Section 4. Article 1, Section 4 is where we're at. Article 1, remember, is the legislative branch. Article 2 is the executive branch. Article 3 is the judicial branch. Article 4 is regarding the states. Article 5 is regarding amendments. Article 6, federal government. Article 7, ratification. Bill of Rights, the first first four are our personal rights, our first 3, 1, 2, and 3. Then 4 through 8 are our legal rights. Number 9 are all other rights. And then amendment number 10 is the states' rights. The Constitution is organized in a very easy to understand fashion. When it was written in a manner for all people to understand. It's hard to understand today, not because it was poorly written, but because they've messed with the language. Good afternoon, Nini. Nini D, maybe? See if I pronounce it right. I'm sure I'll find out. In the chat room, once again, I am paying attention to the chat room. If you want to jump in there and find out, throw a question at me or just have a conversation with our other chatters, knock yourself out. Article 1, Section 4, this is about elections, and elections are in the news a lot, especially since 2020, but even since 2016, even since 2000. Remember the Chads, the hanging Chads? When I first heard about hanging Chads, I thought it was a guy named Chad hanging on the monkey bars, but elections are in the news a lot. This clarifies certain things. So remember, during the election in 2020, when a lot of concerns were thrown in the air, and a lot of cases recently, like Moore v. Harper being one of them, the question is, who has control? Who has authority? Who's supposed to be doing this? Who can certify? Who can decertify? Who is in charge of the manner and procedures of elections? Presidential elections versus other federal elections versus local elections. Where does this all come from? So this will be a part of our discussion today. Article 1, Section 4 reads as such. The times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature. State legislature has all the authority there on those elections. But the Congress may at any time by law make or alter such regulations except as the place of choosing senators. Now, you'll notice here that it says the times, places, and manners of holding elections for senators and representatives. Presidential elections are not included here. Presidential elections are outlined in Article 2. The state legislature will have the job of deciding how the electors will be chosen. Most of the time, the way they chose it was that 2 of the electors would be chosen by the 2 legislative houses, and the remainder would be chosen by the congressional districts, popular vote by the people. Then the electors would vote for president. The people did not vote directly for president. Part of the problem that we're having with this fraud idea, what's going on with Trump, what went on with back in the 1870s even, is because the people are voting directly for president. It's not how the Electoral College was originally designed. Also, the thing is, too, about it is this. Not only did the people not directly vote for president, but the electors voted for president, but also the electoral votes were given based on who they voted for. It wasn't a winner take all in a state. So if you had 5 electors and they went in 4 different directions, then you've got electoral votes going to 4 different people. That's the way it was. Today, we have 2 states that split up their electoral votes, Maine and Nebraska. Nebraska? Yeah, Nebraska. But it's supposed to be a per elector system. Do you think the fraud would have happened if that's the way they did it? Probably not. All right, so presidential elections not included in this. Why? Because of the next part. Let me read from the beginning for full context. The times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof, but the Congress may at any time by law make or alter such regulations. So there was a concern. What if the state's manners and procedures for an election were tyrannical? There has to be a check against it. They decided the check would be the other legislature, Congress. Notice number 1, the governor, the president, the state courts, the federal courts are not mentioned here. The courts have no say when it comes to these elections for senators and representatives. But notice here it says Congress may, if they feel there's a problem, alter such regulations, make a law, by law, or alter such regulations. The reason why a presidential election is not here is because they don't want Congress even messing with that. Every single piece of legislation that's monkeying with presidential elections are unconstitutional. Presidential elections, the appointment of the electors is solely, completely, without any outside influence allowed on the state legislatures, period. Now, that said, this says something else that's very interesting. Once again, I'm going to read from the top for full context. Listen to the very end. The times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof, but the Congress may at any time by law make or alter such regulations, except as to the places of choosing senators. They specifically put in there, Congress has no ability, no allowance. They're not allowed to make any law that alters the law or regulations of how the places of choosing the senators. The state legislatures are the ones that appointed the senators. They're saying here Congress has no authority whatsoever to change that. What changed it? 17th Amendment. 17th Amendment, 1913, was proposed by Congress and then ratified by the states. Not at first. It took a while. When they deemed it ratified, it wasn't ratified yet, but it did get enough ratification votes eventually. And then the U.S. Senate was changed from being appointed by the state legislatures, each senator being appointed by each house of the state legislature, to democratically being voted in. And the states had no choice. Well, what we just read here says that Congress can't make any law altering such regulations. regarding places of choosing senators. They can't do it. No regulations, no law, can't alter. Who proposed the 17th Amendment? Congress did. Congress violated this clause. The 17th Amendment was proposed illegally in the first place. Well, Doug, aren't we supposed to be a democracy? No, democracy is the problem. I'm not saying that the people shouldn't vote at all. People in this original system had a vote. Their House of Representatives, they were part of the vote for the electors. They voted for their members of their state assembly or state House of Representatives or state House of Delegates, whatever you want to call it. And they voted for the governor and they voted for local office. But the constituency there was more than one constituency. In the case of U.S. senators, the constituency was the states. In the case of state senators, the constituency was the counties. They're the ones that appointed the state senators at the time. So we got a problem here. We keep going after the symptoms. Well, Doug, we need to stop them from doing A or B. The whole system's screwed up. How about we fix it first? You're not gonna change how they do something because the whole system's screwed up. We got to go to the foundation here. There's a foundational flaw. We keep addressing the symptoms, and the foundational flaw is that we're not even supposed to be voting for people the way that we're voting for them in the first place. The electors are supposed to vote for president, not directly from the people. The people and the legislatures together vote for the electors and who's going to be electors, but the electors vote for president. The senators are appointed by your state house, your state senate, and your state senate. Well, those guys were appointed by the county legislature, and it was one per county rather than by district based on population as it is today. In other words, it wasn't democracy. That change happened with something called Reynolds v. Sims, 1964, Warren Court. Alabama got sued for doing it the old way, appointing senators, one per county. The Warren Court got the case, said, you can't do that. It's not very democratic. Got to be a democracy. Wait a second. Article 4, Section 4, it says that the United States shall guarantee to each state a Republican form of government, not a democratic form of government. So once again, the Constitution was violated. When I say the Constitution was violated, because I get this all the time. Well, Doug, the Constitution is a set of guidelines, but it's living and breathing. It's not living and breathing, and it's not a set of guidelines. It is the law of the land. It says so in Article 6. And living and breathing means that, it's like you're living and breathing. As you go through life, your viewpoints change. You mature. You look at things differently. You alter how you handle situations because you're living and breathing. That's what they mean when they say, well, the Constitution is living and breathing. It's a contract. And it requires an amendment process to change it. It does not change with the times. It is not a set of guidelines. It is a contract that must be physically amended through a process. So, Moore v. Harper, which allowed the courts to be an oversight over the state legislature regarding elections, in this case, how they draw the lines for districts, unconstitutional ruling. They ruled against the states. They said that the courts can be an oversight. Courts are not even mentioned in this stuff. None of their business. There's no authority. Well, Doug, who's going to check those horrible legislatures? You are. You vote for, originally for half of them, the ones in the state house. And then you voted for the people who are appointing, if we were doing it the old way, the state senators, which were going to be the voice of the rural areas more because it was one per county. Quit complaining about the problems. It's our fault. We're the ones that put them in place. And I don't want to hear this. Well, all of them are going to go bad. No. They didn't early on. Some of them did. Most of them have sacred honor. We don't do our due diligence. We've left the system. There's no checks and balances like there used to be. We're not paying attention, and we're too close to democracy. We have some serious issues going on. Not symptoms, foundational flaws, because we're not following the Constitution based on its original intent. You have two houses of Congress that are supposed to be different, and because they're different, they're going to check each other when it comes to these issues, these responsibilities. So we're complaining about a symptom, but the foundation is we don't have two houses that are different from each other. They're both democratically voted in. They're the same. Why have two houses if there's not going to be any difference between the two? The point of having a bicameral Congress or a bicameral legislature is that the two sides are different from each other and they're going to debate it. Debate equals liberty. No debate, you have a single party rule. Single party rule, you have tyranny. Simple as that. We can sit there and get in arguments over the symptoms all we want. And we can get in arguments over blue and red and green and everything else. It doesn't matter. The foundation's wrong. We allowed them to take away the oversight by the states over federal government and to move us towards democracy. If foundationally we're not sound, how are we going to survive when the real chips are down and we're bickering over symptoms that exist because the foundation is screwed up? Next paragraph. The Congress shall assemble at least once in every year. I tell people that's one of my favorite clauses in the Constitution. The Congress shall assemble at least once in every year. There were those during the convention in Philadelphia in 1787 when this thing was being debated, when the committees were fighting over things, and this came to the floor. And there were those that said, hey, that's too often. I've got a farm to take care of. I've got a store to keep. I've got a practice to run. I'm a merchant, or I'm a doctor, or I'm a lawyer, or I'm a whatever. And while I'm willing to give my time to be a member of this legislature, this Congress, because I love my country, the people elected me, I'm into it, we don't have very many authorities. The authorities to the federal Congress, for the most part, are zero or very small unless there's a war going on. Unless there's a war going on, a trade dispute between the states, something needed over the postal system, maritime law, invaders across our border. Unless those things are happening, I've got no reason to be at the Capitol. That was the attitude. So why are we going to meet more than once a year if the only time we're needed is when we're at war and et cetera, et cetera? Wow. I remember when Obama was president. I was telling this to my class earlier today in Fallbrook. And I remember when President Obama was president, and some of my colleagues, people who I agree with normally, people who are in the trenches with me, or telling me how they're mad at Obama because he's on the golf course all the time. He's not even in the Oval Office, not even willing to do his job. My response? No, I want him on the golf course. The less he's in Washington, the happier I am. Go golfing. If you're going golfing, you're not screwing up my country. Throw a 2-year tournament. Take Congress with you. And then in 2 years, after the tournament's over, take the new Congress with you for 2 years. Have a big tournament. I love do-nothing Congresses. I love presidents that do nothing, unless it's necessary, of course. President Trump had a lot on his plate. But these tyrants, that we seem to keep getting? Go golfing. Congress, go golfing. I'll pay for your green fees. Hell. Congress shall assemble at least once in every year, and such meeting shall be, and this next part's in brackets because it has changed, on the first Monday in December. Think about that. The session for Congress began in December after an election. They later moved it to March. In fact, the first Congress didn't meet till March of 1789. That's a long lame duck session. So you go from a very short one from November to December to a very long one from November to March. Now it's in January. It's January 1st, 2nd, actually. And then the president's January 20th. But it used to be March. Began in December, then with December, then it went to March. Now it's January. This is an interesting section. Hang on to your hats for this one, because I'm going to tie it into a few things. Each house shall be the judge of the elections, returns, and qualifications of its own members. You ever heard the term that Congress could refuse to seat somebody? Where that comes from is this. If they determine that based on the election, the return, the qualifications of the candidate, they shouldn't take their seat, then it's up to them not to allow them to take their seat. Each house is the judge of its elections, returns, qualifications. Well, who's supposed to take care of those elections and look into them and make sure everybody's qualified? Each house. Notice once again, the president's not mentioned here. I have a lawsuit that I'm a part of against Kamala Harris for not being eligible for office. It was dismissed by the district court, dismissed by the Ninth Circuit Court. Now we have a writ of certiorari with the Supreme Court. Supreme Court is on recess right now, maybe a couple months before we even hear anything. One of the arguments against us is that they said that Congress has the authority to determine the qualifications of the candidates. Well, for each house, yes. The Senate determines qualifications of senators. The House determines qualifications of the representatives. But president and vice president's not mentioned there. The word certify appears in the Constitution twice. The electors shall certify the election. They certify it by sealing the envelope and sending their count, their ballots, the vote to the president of the Senate, who's supposed to then open up those certificates, open up the envelopes, and count the votes in front of a joint session of Congress. But it doesn't say anything about determining the qualifications. It doesn't say Congress has a job to determine the qualifications of that person. So if it doesn't say anything about Congress determining the qualifications of the vice presidential or presidential candidate, then who does? Well, there's this amendment called the 10th Amendment, Amendment 10, Amendment X. X marks the spot. And it gives us our answer. Powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. So if it's not delegated to the United States, the federal government, by the Constitution, and it's not prohibited by the Constitution to the states, and it's not prohibited, it's not even mentioned, that means that job, that determination belongs to state legislatures or to the people. Well, Doug, the legislatures aren't doing their job. That's okay. We can do it. Oh, wait a second. We have a lawsuit and they told us we don't have standing. And that's up to Congress to make that determination. Wrong on both situations. I love the left. They're out there saying, see, you can't even get your court case. You've been dismissed. Ha, ha, ha. So I'm somehow to be sad because that's somehow my fault and that I don't have a case because they are breaking the law and they are refusing to recognize the law. So each house determines the qualifications of its members. The states determine the qualifications and the people, presidential and vice presidential candidates. Then it says in Article 1, Section 5, good to see a war hamster. While we do have a pretty good group watching, the chat room is a little anemic right now. So war hamster, I give you permission to grab a soup spoon in there and start stirring the pot. It says, and a majority of each shall constitute a quorum to do business. What is a quorum? It's saying a majority constitutes a quorum in this case, but the word quorum doesn't necessarily mean majority. It means that the number needed in order to do business. How many members must be present in order to do business? That's a quorum. In the case of Congress, either House, Senate, or the House, according to Article 1, Section 5 of the United States Constitution, a majority shall constitute a quorum. So however many members are in the House of Representatives, half of that plus one. In the case of the Senate, 51 or more. Half plus one, majority. In order to have a quorum. You don't have a majority, you don't have a quorum. That means you can't do business if you don't have a quorum. Here's what it says about that. A majority of each shall constitute a quorum to do business, but a smaller number may adjourn from day to day and may be authorized to compel the audience of absent members in such manner and under such penalties as each house may provide. So, here's what it's saying. Just because you don't have a quorum doesn't mean that you don't stay in session. You can stay in session. You don't have to go on recess if you don't have a quorum. But Doug, what good is being in session if they can't do any business? You don't have a quorum. Let's say you don't trust the president. Because if the Congress, the Senate specifically, goes out of session and a vacancy appears in a particular seat that would need senatorial confirmation, like a judge or some officers, if they're on recess, the president then can do what's called a recess appointment. He can appoint whoever he wants temporarily until they come back in a session and they approve the person or ask for a different nomination. The recess appointments nomination expires the next time that the Senate goes out of session again. Then you would have to do another recess appointment. So if you don't trust the president, you don't want him doing recess appointments, what do? Hey, everybody's going on vacation, but we don't trust this guy. He might do a recess appointment we don't approve of. So what we'll do is we'll stay in session even though we don't have quorum. That's called a pro forma session. Pro-FORMA, pro forma session. And yes, Constitution says they can do that. But if they're in a pro forma session, there's only a few of them. They're like, man, we got a situation here. We've just been invaded, or we've got, the president ran into too many walls, whatever. We need to compel members of Congress to be here so we can have a quorum so we can take care of business. Then it says that they can compel the attendance of absent members. Say, hey, you know what? I know you're not here right now. We're still in session. We don't have a quorum. We need you here. If you don't get here by such or such date, there's going to be a penalty. Censure. Or you're going to lose a seat on a committee. Or you don't get to play in the sandbox. I don't know. So they're allowed to stay in session, but not meet quorum. And if they have not met quorum, they're still in session, and they need to have a quorum so they can do business. They can compel members to attend, and there can be a penalty. And Warhamster says, Doug, what about when Obama declared that the state was in recess? If I remember properly, there were 4 recess appointments that he had appointed. I want to say they had something to do with one of the nautical departments, if I remember properly. I can't remember the details of who they were. But yeah, there was 4 recess appointments. And they said, hey, those are illegal recess appointments. We were still in session. He says, no, everybody was gone. You're on recess. He says, no, we decide we're in recess, not you, Mr. President. And then they sued the president. And they won. And those temporary appointments lost their seats. To answer Warhamster's question. Good question in the chat room. Winters says to Warhamster, you've been missed. You were one of my favorites. I guess Ron and I are chopped liver. No, I'm kidding, Winters. Don't worry about it. I'm not hurt. Okay. Let's continue through the Constitution. Next clause. Once again, we're in Article 1, Section 5. Now we're on the second paragraph of Article 1, Section 5. Michigan Lady Patriots in there. Hiya, kiddo. Good to see you. All right. Everybody's in the chat. I do pay attention to the chat. So if you're not in the chat, we've got a good number of people watching now. Feel free to get in there and type. Appreciate you. Good to see you. All right. So each house may determine the rules of its proceedings. Each house may determine the rules of its proceedings. So why did the House do this? Or why does the Senate do that? Because they set up those rules and they're allowed to. It says so in the Constitution. I give you an example. The filibuster and cloture. This is a Senate rule. So the United States Senate, it is established that when there is a debate on the floor, in order to get it out of debate so that a vote can be called for, they must achieve cloture. Cloture is 60 votes. So you better make sure a lot of people are there because you need 60 to get it out of debate. It can't be voted on until you achieve cloture. So what do you do if you're a part of the minority party? You try and keep it from going to the vote. You filibuster. You do everything you can to keep the debate going. If you keep the debate going, eventually people get tired. Eventually people go home. You leave then when nobody's there. Then when it looks like they might have the 60 again, then you go back and you do the filibuster again. You do everything you can to keep it from going to the vote so that it might die on the floor. It gives the minority a voice, should I say, when they're outnumbered on something. In other words, it better be good. Take 60 votes, get it out of debate. Filibuster, basically someone tries to just keep talking, keep debating. They dominate the floor. One time Ted Cruz was at the podium so long that he started running out of things to say, so he read Green Eggs and Ham just to keep the filibuster going. Now, that's a rule of their proceedings that they came up with. It's not in the Constitution, but they're allowed to do that. Now, that all said, and thank you for the link there in the chat room, Warhamster. It's a good one. All right. Then it says, after each house may determine the rules of its proceedings, punish its members for disorderly behavior. Well, censure, that's not censor, censure, C-E-N-S-U-R-E, censure, which is a public humiliation. Oftentimes how it's performed is they'll have the person in a public scene and then his colleagues will then turn their backs on him. That's one way of punishing a member of a legislative body. And then it says, with the concurrence of 2/3, expel a member. Someone asked me one time, well, how do we get rid of Maxine Waters? We can't recall her. Her voters keep voting her in with over 70% of the vote. How do you get rid of her? You get 2/3 of the House to be willing to get rid of her. 2/3 vote, let's say of those present, when there's a quorum, possibly, but it doesn't say that. So I have to look more into that. Maybe it's just 2/3 total. I have to look into it. Now I'm curious. I'm asking my own question. I hadn't really thought about it until just now. Is that 2/3 of those present, or is that 2/3 of the entire number? Normally in the Constitution, when it means 2/3 present or a percentage of number present, it would say so. It doesn't say here. Good. I have to look into it. But they can't expel a member. Milady Patriot. I know this question is late, but I've been multitasking. Is it possible to challenge the 17th Amendment and bring it to SCOTUS? Would we want to? Yes, but I don't believe bringing it to SCOTUS is the way to do it. I believe bringing SCOTUS to it is the way to do it. I'm still working on a communication issue with a representative in Utah who has agreed that Utah ought to defy the 17th Amendment. There's a long story that goes with it, so I'm not going to go over it tonight. And then if a state were to defy the 17th Amendment, what would happen? The federal government would sue that state. And if a state is a party to a lawsuit, the Supreme Court has original jurisdiction. They have to take the case. That's the plan that I'm working on. Communication with the representatives that I've been in touch with has been slow and difficult, sort of like dealing with in-laws. But that's what I'm working on. That's the way to do it. Same with Reynolds v. Sims. I think so, yeah. Because the thing is, also, when it comes to a lawsuit, there has to, you can't just sue for the heck of it. There has to be injury. Well, when it comes to Reynolds v. Sims, who is the injured party or an injured party? Utah. Now, but rather than Utah sue on it, what I think the way to do it is have Utah, like with the 17th Amendment, defy Reynolds v. Sims. Once again, I have to get enough of these legislators in Utah to agree with me. And I picked Utah because they were the state that was most against it. So if ever there's a state that I can use for that, it would be Utah. Then, if they defied it, once again, the federal government would sue Utah for not following a court precedent. Because the state is a party to the case, Article 3 says that the Supreme Court has original jurisdiction. So it must go straight to the Supreme Court. And then the Supreme Court, once again, would have to say, hey, state, you're defying, or wait a second. Remember, in Gamble versus the United States, 2019, Clarence Thomas wrote that if a decision, a ruling, or a judicial opinion is egregiously unconstitutional, it must be overturned. It must be reversed. So I believe with this court, if it did wind up in front of this Supreme Court, because a state decided to defy Reynolds v. Sims. Now, that said, there is another way to, it goes a little deeper than that. What I'm talking about is nullification. You're on top of it, Michigan, Lady Patriot. Nullify. Nullification is unconstitutional. We're not going to follow it. Oh, we're going to sue you. Let's let it go to the court. Let's fight it out. Let's let the American public know what's going on. Now, what she's asking about for the rest of you who just got lost, Reynolds v. Sims, 1964, is the case that forced the states to change how they populate their state senate. State senate used to be populated by appointment by the county legislature, one per county, or in some states who had more than the number of senators, more counties than the number of senators. Some of the senators might represent one or two counties or three counties, but nothing like it is now, where it's based on population. Like in California, last time I checked, once again, I know it's changed since then, but last time I checked, Senate District number 2, one senator for 8 counties, and then in Los Angeles, you had 15 senatorial districts. That means those rural counties up in Northwest California has 1/8 of a vote in the Senate, state Senate, and Los Angeles County has 15 votes. It favors the population centers, democracy. we want the rural voice to be stronger in the Senate, because the way you stop a majority faction from controlling everything is you give the other faction a loud enough voice to stop them, to stand against them, to argue with them, bring them bearing down on each other. That's the argument that James Madison provides in Federalist Paper number 10. It says, you got factions, you got problems with these factions, you make sure the minority faction is able to be a thorn in the side to the majority faction. You pit them against each other. That was the whole purpose of our legislative system, why it was designed the way it was designed, to make sure that the rural faction was loud enough to challenge the majority faction, so that the majority faction, typically in line with the populace, the biggest population, the population centers, the cities, wouldn't rule everything. They would have someone standing against them. And even if the cities got so big that they dominated the popular vote, the Democratic vote, by having the counties appointing one per county, the state senator, and by having the states appointing the U.S. senators, 2 per state, it gives the rural factions a louder voice in the state and U.S. Senates. Warhamster says, sounds undemocratic to me. Exactly. Already went over Article 4, Section 4. You were late. Democracy is the problem. For those of you listening to this, for those of you who are listening live now or listening to this later, do you know the difference between a democracy and a republic? I go over the difference between a democracy and a republic bit by bit, piece by piece in my book, Repeal Democracy. Look me up online, Douglas V. Gibbs, Repeal Democracy, buy the book. I go over a lot of this stuff in that book. Democracy is the problem. We need to go back to being a republic. A federal republic, Warhamster would remind me to say. Because there's lots of people, lots of groups that claim to be a republic out there. But what we were specifically was a federal republic. Notice I'm using the past tense. We are in a post-federal republic age at the moment. We need to restore that. Okay, next clause. It's about halfway down Article 1, Section 5. Each house shall keep a journal of its proceedings, and from time to time publish the same, excepting such parts as may in their judgment require secrecy. Transparency. Here's what we talked about. Here's the vote. Everything we've done, everything we've talked about, every vote is here, except the things that we don't want China or whoever else to know about. I mean, they're still going to find out because of the Clintons, but, All right. And then it says, and the yeas and nays of the members of either house on any question shall, at the desire of 1/5 of those present, be entered on the journal. 1/5, 20%. All you need is 20% to say, we want the vote, the yeas and the nays, in that journal for everybody to see. Only 20%. In other words, they wanted to make it very easy to make sure that how they voted was, transparent. Everybody could see. However, they left the door open that if 80% says, whoa, we can't publish that, it would create a constitutional crisis. It would create a national security crisis, whatever. So if more than 4/5, more than 80% of them says, nope, we don't want the votes on that journal, then they can make it happen. Otherwise, only 1/5, only 20% votes to say we want it in the journal. And everybody knows how everybody voted. And that's a great tool. I can't count how many times for certain critters, not all of them, but as many as I can that I think I need to keep an eye on, I pay attention to their voting record. Because, see, that vote is being recorded because at least a fifth is saying, yeah, it needs to be out there. So you can find out how your critter voted on this issue or that issue. And there are websites that actually publish that and keep track of it too. So you don't necessarily have to go to the journal, the record where the journal's at. You can go to other people who check that out and then publish it. It's a great thing if we're willing to utilize it. Problem is, most Americans don't utilize what's available to them. Therefore, they're not well informed. All righty. Now, next part. Neither house during the session of Congress shall, without the consent of the other, adjourn for more than 3 days. Remember when we were talking about the pro forma session, going on recess, not going on recess, even if you don't have enough for a quorum? Another reason why they don't like to go on recess is because they have to make sure they get permission of the other house before they do it. They can't go out of session for more than 3 days without the other house also approving it. So your house has to vote to approve it, and then the other house has to vote to approve it before you can go on recess. Nor to any other place than that in which the two houses shall be sitting. In other words, wherever you're supposed to meet, whatever chamber you're supposed to be in, that's where you meet. You want to meet somewhere else? You want to have a House of Representatives session at, say, Yankee Stadium? You better get permission from the other house before you do it. Section 6, Article 1, Section 6. The senator's representative shall receive a compensation for their services. Services. They're there to serve their country, even more so than military, because military is more of a job. You're going to get a paycheck. But here, they get a compensation, or at least that's what it's supposed to be. You take your time out of your busy day. You take your time out of being a farmer. You take your time out of being a storekeeper. You take your time out of running your practice. You take your time out of being a fisherman. So we're going to compensate you for it. We didn't have professional politicians back then. People didn't become politicians for a job. They remained what they were, and the politician part was something they did as an extracurricular activity. They shall receive a compensation for their services to be ascertained by law. Ascertained by law means it must go through the legislative process, the full legislative process. It needs to be proposed. It needs to go through the committees it goes through. It needs to be then voted on and approved by the House. And it needs to go to the other House where they send it through their committees and they vote on it. And if they make no amendments, they can go to the president. If they do make an amendment, then it goes back to the other House. Then they vote on it, or they may make an amendment. Then it goes back to the other house. It's a legislative process. So they don't just, let's vote ourselves a raise. There is debate. There is committees. There are committees that are involved in determining whether or not this raise in compensation should be done. And then even after both houses approve it, it still needs to go to the president for signature. You have a reasonable president, he may veto it and say, yeah, you guys already make a good amount of money, getting ridiculous. You don't need a raise. Of course, they could override that veto also. Congress, both houses by 2/3. And paid out of the treasury of the United States. They don't get paid by their states. They don't get paid by their county. They don't get paid by the city they're from. They get paid by the federal treasury, the federal government. That lump of money. They shall in all cases except treason, felony, and breach of peace be privileged from arrest during the attendance at the session of their respective houses. One of the problems back then that was happening is, hey, Charlie, George over there is going to vote against our measure. Let's have him arrested. If he's arrested, he can't be there to vote. Good idea. Can't do that. They are privileged from arrest on their way there, while in session, or on the way back. To avoid such a thing. Problem is, to fix one problem, we created a new problem. Now they believe they're above the law. They're not above the law, or at least they're not supposed to be above the law. And guess what? They can be arrested when they're in their apartment, when they're in their district, when they're not on their way to the chamber, in the chamber, or on their way back from the chamber to do their business. So they shall be privileged from arrest during their attendance at the session of their respected houses, and in going to and returning from the same, and for any speech or debate in either house they shall not be questioned in any other place. They cannot be held for things like slander and all that for what they say on the floor. They need to say what they need to say, and they shouldn't be fearful to say anything. So legally, what they say on the floor, sort of like Vegas, right? What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. What happens on the floor of Congress stays on the floor of Congress. Lolly asks, was it legal for them to vote from home and over Zoom? I would say from a strict constructionist point of view of the U.S. Constitution, absolutely not. I want them present. I have a lot of friends that would love to see everything go digital, see everything go, well, we could have lots of representatives and just have them jump online. Do you really want that, especially with the age of AI, where AI can interpret? Let me rephrase that. Impersonate anybody. I want them physically present, especially with the rise of AI. This is one of my favorite clauses. And this will probably be the last thing we'll talk about. Very end of Article 1, Section 6, last paragraph. One of your favorite people is going to come up in this conversation. No senator or representative shall, during the time for which he was elected, be appointed to any civil office under the authority of the United States, which shall have been created, or the emoluments whereof shall have been increased during such time. In other words, if you are a member of the House or a member of the Senate, and the salary, the emolument for a particular office is either created, that office is created, or the emolument is given a raise, the amount is increased, and you are a member of Congress. You didn't even have to vote or not vote for it. As long as you were a member of either house when that vote happened, you are not eligible for that office. This was to try to avoid corruption. Hey, if you vote for this, I'll make sure that you get it in the future. Can't do that. It happens often, more than you'd like to know. One great example is one of your favorite people in the world, Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton was a member of the United States Senate when the wages, the salary, the emolument for Secretary of State was increased. Then she was appointed as Secretary of State by President Barack Obama. She was ineligible. She wasn't supposed to take that seat. She was in the Senate when that vote went down for the increase in pay. Don't worry, says the Democrats. We have a fix for that. We'll make it constitutional. It's called the Saxby fix. S-A-X-B-E, Saxby fix. Basically, what they do is they roll back the pay to what it was before the vote. That way it's as if it never happened. See, it's fine. It's as if it never happened. Therefore, she's eligible. It's not what it says. Whether the pay comes back down later is not the point. It says in the Constitution that if a person is a senator or representative during the time that the emolument of a civil office under the authority of the United States is increased or created, therefore they're not eligible, period. There is no, unless they reduce it back down again. It's not in there. You want it? Propose the amendment. She was not eligible for office. She had no business taking that seat as Secretary of State. In fact, nobody in Congress, either House Representative or Senate, at the time of that vote to increase the emoluments for the office of Secretary of State, none of them were eligible to take that seat. Winters in the chat room says a lot of corruption. You ain't kidding. Nothing legal about rolling back something to benefit current office holders. Exactly. And then after that, it says, and no person holding any office under the United States shall be a member of either house during his continuance in office. If you are going to hold office of any kind, as an officer, Secretary of State, Postmaster General, whatever federal office it is, you cannot also hold a seat in the Senate or the House. You can't be both. It's one or the other. That's what that's saying. We got 5 minutes left. I'm going to go over one more clause. Top of Article 1, Section 7. This is actually very good, very important. I want you to listen carefully. Remember, we got two houses of Congress. House of Representatives, U.S. Senate. House of Representatives, voice of the people. People have always democratically voted them into office. The senators, at the time of the writing of this, were appointed by the state legislatures. So if you've got a budget issue and you want to, say, increase the budget, increase revenue in order to cover something, who do you want to have the original idea? Federal government? The states? The president? Or the people? Article 1, Section 7. All bills for raising revenue shall originate in the House of Representatives, but the Senate may propose or concur with amendments as on other bills. If it has to do with money, if the revenue has to be raised to take care of this, it has to originate in the House of Representatives, the voice of the people. It has to be the people to say, you know what? If this is going to be the budget, we need to initiate it. Which ties into something else. Someone says to me, well, gosh, Doug, then what do you think the founding fathers would have thought about shutting down the federal government when the budget deal can't be agreed on in the House? That was the point. If the people don't like how the money's being spent, shut it down until you're willing to agree with the people in the House. Shut it down. We can wait. Well, yeah, but Doug, but what about all these domestic things the federal government take? They don't have the authority. It's not supposed to affect the states and the people if it's shut down. It's supposed to affect the external stuff and things for the union. Shut it down. The point of giving the power of the purse strings to the House of Representatives, which was the democratic vote of the people to populate that particular house. The point was that it could all be shut down if the people didn't get their way when it came to the money, and that the people could shut other things down. Don't like the war? Stop paying for it. No money, no war. Don't like the use of drones by the federal government? Shut it down. Don't offer the money anymore because the people won't allow it in the budget. Don't trust the alphabet agencies anymore? No problem. Cut them out of the budget. Yeah, but Doug, they'll shut the... Exactly. Shut it down then until they agree. The people have that ultimate power. The people have the power of the purse strings right there. Article 1, Section 7. All right, my friends, we've gone through a lot today. We should see Ron back next week. I've done some videos lately. Not all of them are on YouTube. 2 of them are on Rumble and not on YouTube because I knew YouTube would have a problem with them. Rumble.com/Douglas V. Gibbs, YouTube.com/Douglas V. Gibbs, DouglasVGibbs.com, PoliticalPistachio.com. If you want to help fund what I'm doing, be it with updating the website or with paying for the radio shows, whatever. There's ways to do it. I'm getting ready to get the donation pages at the new DouglasVGibbs.com set up in the next few days. We're opening that site phase by phase. Hopefully, you've been paying a visit. And hopefully, it'll get better. But within the next 4 to 6 weeks, it should be full throttle. United we stand. Combined we kick butt. God bless America, my friends. God bless you. Thank you for joining me. Don't forget, I got 2 radio shows, KMET 1490 AM, Saturdays 1 to 3 Pacific, and KPraise, KPRZ.com, 9 o'clock Pacific in the evening. Or you can look that one up on any of the podcast channels. Go to your favorite podcast and just type in Mr. Constitution by Douglas V. Gibbs. It'll come up, past episodes. All right, thanks for spending the time with me. Good to see you. We'll see you next time. God bless. Stay constitutional. See you next time. Bye-bye now.